Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com Formula One podcast. We are a day after the chaos that was the Australian Grand Prix, and it is my job to try and make sense of it all. To help me do that, I have, as always, Asian correspondent Michael Butterworth and Editorial Director Dieter Rencken. Dieter, hello to you, and have you, in all of your years of watching this fabulous sport, seen a race like that?
Well, Balve, what I must add here is I've been watching Formula One for about close on 60 years. So, obviously there have been chaotic races in that time. I mean, think back immediately on Mugello 2020. That was pretty chaotic. I think back on the 2021 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. That was pretty chaotic. So, yes, we've had chaos all over the place. And this, frankly, is far, far better than a sort of orderly procession, a sort of lights to flag victory with number 2 finishing 10 meters behind the number 3 10 meters behind that and whatever else. I'd far rather have the unpredictability. However, let's not get too carried away. It shouldn't be overdone, and I do believe that yesterday the show took precedent over the sport, and that's why we had so many red flags.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later on. But Michael, hello to you as well. You had the pleasure of watching the Australian Grand Prix at a quote-unquote normal time where you are.
It was nice to watch it at 1 p.m. over here. Of course, I suppose for you guys based in Europe, it gives you a flavour of what it must be for the Australian and American fans who have to tune in every week at all sorts of hours of the morning. So the shoe's on the other foot this time. But of course, we've got this again later on in the year when we've got the Las Vegas Grand Prix, which I believe, because that'll be a 10 p.m. start on the west coast of America, I believe that is exactly the same time everywhere else in the world. So yeah, we've got a lot of readers on Racing News 365 from Australia and from America, from North America, and yeah, it's nice to be able to have a race in a time zone that suits them.
Absolutely. Michael, you're 100% correct with that. It's one of these sort of almost Eurocentric obsessions that Formula One has had, which is starting at 2 or 3 o'clock everywhere, and because it was predominantly a European sport. However, as it's sort of spread across the world, I think that it's only fair that the European audiences at times also get subjected to either early starts or very late starts and whatever else. Yeah, absolutely.
I thought I'd need at least 7 cups of coffee to keep me awake, but the fighting on track did that for me. Michael, Dieter and I will do our very best to unpack everything that happened at Albert Park. So let's get down to business. Michael, all I'm going to say is 3 words: lap 1 drama.
Lap 1 drama, well, lap 9 drama, lap 54 drama, lap 56 drama. Yeah, there was drama all over the place, and I'm going to try and keep this as quick as I can, and that's going to be rather a challenge because there was so much going on. We had that early safety car with Charles Leclerc having beached himself in the gravel, or having been nerfed off on lap 1, rather. Then lap 8, we had another safety car. Alex Albon crashed, and they couldn't remove that without the safety car intervention. They upgraded that after 1 lap to a red flag, and I think we're going to discuss a little bit later on whether or not that was the right decision. There was some interesting decisions that were taken, like Dieter alluded to earlier. And several of the drivers had some interesting things to say as well about what was sort of alluding to, or just saying directly, in fact, that they thought maybe it was some very strange decisions that changed the course of the race. But once we did get going again, Max Verstappen ended up in his sort of customary position, looking very comfortable out front until lap 54, when Kevin Magnussen hit the wall, lost the wheel, and then we had another red flag. And of course, that meant another standing start. That completely negated the lead that Verstappen had up to that point, and that led to the chaos that we saw over the last few laps of the race.
Yes, Michael, you mentioned the red flags there. Dieter, let's go with you with the first one.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was Alex Albon. He thumped the barrier pretty hard. There was some kitty litter all over the circuit. Was it necessary to have a red flag? Let's just consider how many tools the race director has in his toolbox. He's got yellows. He's got waved yellows. He's got a safety car. He's got a virtual safety car. Then he has a red flag. And it almost appears as though somebody said, the default option will always be red flag, and we can try and sell it on the basis of safety. Yes, of course, I'm totally aware of safety. I've spoken to the safety director at the FIA. I was there 3 weeks ago. I respect enormously the amount of work that's being done on safety, but let's not turn everything into a safety issue. I do believe that with a safety car, they could in fact have cleared the track without the red flag. And, this I think is really what the race director needs to do, is instead of immediately, when I say immediate, in this case, admittedly, there was a safety car, then there was a red flag. However, I think that they could have taken a bit more time, considered it a bit more, and maybe cleared the stuff up without the red flag. Because the red flag, the minute you have an interruption, you have an interruption to the competitive order, the strategies, the tactics, the everything, and it just completely damages the race. I know that later on in the segment, we're going to be discussing the fact or the question of whether one should do work under a red flag. And this, I think, is the major issue with red flags, that it completely changes the face of the race.
Again, Dieter, we're discussing whether or not this was too cautious a decision, just as we did last week and just as we did last year at Monaco when we had that safety car start in the rain. And obviously, with the red flag coming out, then that allows free tyre choice, and it completely disadvantaged George Russell and Carlos Sainz, who, had the red flag not been flown, would have been in a really, really good position, having changed onto those new tyres under the safety car conditions. And then obviously with free tyre choice under the red flag, they were dropped well down into the order. George Russell, sadly for him, it was a bit of a moot point because he ended up retiring with a mechanical failure anyway. But he, as you might expect, voiced his opinion after the race. He said he didn't agree with it. Even Fernando Alonso, who benefited from the red flag, he suggested that he was very, very surprised by it and by some of the other red flags that we saw as well. It brings back memories for me of Monaco 2011 when we were robbed of that grandstand finish when we had Jenson Button chasing Fernando Alonso, chasing Sebastian Vettel, all of them on newer tyres than the other. And then we had that red flag with 6 laps to go. Then they all bolted on new tyres for the restart, and we were robbed of what was shaping up to be a fantastic finish. And I feel that, maybe it wouldn't have stopped Max Verstappen winning the race, but it certainly ruined the flow of the race, and it ruined the show a little bit in the early stages.
Absolutely, and I think to me the bigger issue is not so much really whether or not they can change tyres, but it's also a question of, had there been damage, the teams can repair the cars and whatever. So effectively, the guys get a free repair window. And the worst thing that can happen is that somebody causes an accident, he damages his car in the process, the red flag comes out, he's able to continue. The guys that he's had the accident with can't, and he can rebuild his car. And we had this in Imola a couple of years ago, where Lewis Hamilton was basically able to do all sorts of work under the red flag. And above all, when I saw George coming to the pit lane to change tyres under what was then the safety car, I actually said to myself, teams are data obsessed. They should know this will be upgraded to a red flag, not because it made sense, but that's the way it's happening at the moment. That fundamentally, almost and I stress almost every incident where there's a bit of gravel on the track or whatever, it becomes a red flag.
So do you think, Dieter, that work should be done under red flag? Consider what you just said earlier. I'm assuming no, but I don't want to put words into your mouth.
No. Let me stress, I've got no problem with doing work under a red flag, but it shouldn't be a free pit stop. In other words, if you do need to change tyres, if you do need to change your front wing or whatever the case is, by all means do it during that period. However, then you go to the back of the grid. And fundamentally, the easiest way of doing that is that if you're third at the time and somebody is 7th and somebody else is 12th, if those 3 cars all do work under the red flag, then they go back in that sequence. So the car that's third joins the back of the grid first, etc., and so on and so forth. And that way you don't have a free stop. I mean, I certainly wouldn't like to suggest that this is the way that teams think, but ultimately you could have a situation where somebody could cause an accident or an incident and then go and pit under the red flag and rebuild his car and go on and win.
We've spoken about the first red flag, Michael. What about the other red flags we had during the latter stages of the Australian Grand Prix?
Well, the second one was the one on lap 54. Max Verstappen was leading pretty convincingly, and then we had that incident with Kevin Magnussen hitting the wall. The red flag came out. Verstappen said afterwards that he thought the safety car would have sufficed, and of course he would say that because, I mean, he's leading the race and he's the one that's got the most to lose. But Lewis Hamilton seemed to agree with him as well. And then obviously once we had another red flag, then we had another standing start, and then that precipitated the melee that we saw late in the race with on lap 56, where we had Carlos Sainz clipping Fernando Alonso. We had Pierre Gasly running wide and taking out Esteban Ocon. We had Logan Sargent rear-ending Nick de Vries, putting them both out of the race. Stroll ended up in the gravel, and it was absolutely crazy. And then, of course, we had another red flag, and nobody really seemed to know afterwards in what order we would what the proper classification was.
So, Dieter, you mentioned that the race director on your previous answer there. We had a former race director in the paddock in the Australian Grand Prix over the weekend.
Michael Masi, yes, absolutely. And I was a bit surprised that people were surprised that he was there. I would, in fact, have been surprised had he not been there. I mean, the guy in some books made a mistake in Abu Dhabi. If one interprets the regulations in a different way, maybe there was nothing wrong with what he'd done, because the sporting clause regarding safety car actually says that the safety car operation shall be under the control of the race director, or words to that effect. So from that perspective, he did execute that regulation the way that he saw fit and was entitled to see fit. He was not fired by the FIA. In fact, he was offered an opportunity of staying on with the FIA. He turned it down. In the aftermath of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in 2021, he was not fired. He was actually retained by the FIA. He was offered another position within the FIA, which frankly would have been roughly the same in terms of status to what he had as race director. He elected not to take it up. He elected to go back to Australia. He's chairman of the Supercar V8 Association, which was one of the support races. Therefore, from that perspective, he had every right to be there. And then, of course, he's also chairman of Karting Australia. And, that's one of the divisions of CAMS, the Confederation of Australian Motorsport. And therefore, overall, the guy had every right to be there. And that's why I was baffled that Ted Kravitz kept on banging on about this. I mean, 2021 has happened. It's over. It's finished. Let's get it out of our system and let's move on. And let's not try and throw sort of all sorts of peculiar poison about the paddock.
Yeah, well, with Michael Masi being in and around an F1 paddock for the first time since Abu Dhabi 21, I wonder what he would have made of all of this. And maybe he was looking on with a wry smile, because we had a lot of, several inconsistencies and that definitely changed the course of the race.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. And, I think if we look at the race, although, as we discussed earlier on, George Russell did eventually retire due to an engine failure or whatever it was. However, fundamentally, I don't think Michael would actually have called that as a red flag. So maybe Mercedes should have been very careful what they asked for back at the end of 2021. I think Michael did try and do his best, and it's just, as far as I'm concerned, everything should be consigned to the past, and that's it.
Yeah, that's definitely where we should leave it. We mentioned the Mercedes there, Michael. The reliability of the W14 has been iconic, but this weekend we seem to have some problems with Russell's car.
I was looking through the archives, and I believe with George Russell retiring with that power unit issue on lap 17, I believe that's the first engine failure in a Grand Prix for a Mercedes factory team, that is, since Valtteri Bottas in Spain 2017. Ever since the start of the turbo hybrid era, Mercedes have famously had this almost bulletproof reliability, especially with the power unit. So that's one power unit failure in 6 years in a Grand Prix. So that's very, very unfortunate for George Russell, but take nothing away from the general incredible reliability that Mercedes have had over the years.
Yes, Michael. Of course, that's an incredible statistic. But I think on the flip side, let's just have a look at it from a performance perspective. What we did have over the years was Mercedes taking a lot of penalty replacements. Therefore, they were precautionary, and therefore the whatever power unit bits didn't actually blow during a race. And they could, of course, afford to do that at the time because they had this massive performance advantage. They could take a 10 grid space penalty and still go and win the race, or come second, or come third, or whatever the case was. So I think it was kind of tempered against that sort of background. But yeah, I mean, the hybrid power units generally, except if yours happens to have a prancing horse on it at the moment, seem to be almost bulletproof.
Another car that is bulletproof is the RB19 Dieter. That the pace of that car is absolutely incredible at the moment.
Absolutely. And, Balve, if we think about the sort of numbers that we see on screen, and then we consider the numbers that we're sort of hearing whispered in the paddock, we're hearing that where on screen they look to be about 0.1, 0.2 of a second ahead of the opposition, I believe they've got at least 0.5, if not even 0.7 of a second in hand with that car. And obviously, we don't see it on a weekend like Australia, where, once Max was in clear air, he wasn't being pushed by his teammate. Therefore, he didn't really have to really push it. Why win by 2 minutes if you can win comfortably by 20 seconds? In the process of trying to win by 2 minutes, you can either throw it away, you could blow the engine, the gearbox, or whatever. So, Jackie Stewart once said that the best victories are the ones where you go slowly enough to win. And this is what the luxury that Red Bull have at the moment, particularly if Max is out on his own, not being challenged by Checo. If Checo's right behind him, or vice versa, then obviously they keep pushing each other. And again, we saw that in Saudi a fortnight ago, where they were pushing each other, and therefore they were well clear ahead of the field. Yesterday, Max didn't have to do that.
Yeah, Alan Jones always used to say he would try and win in the slowest possible speed as well. But talking about the pace that the Red Bull had, we saw when Verstappen took the lead from Hamilton. Obviously, he had the DRS, and he had that open during that new DRS zone between sort of turn 6 and turn 11, the nearly flat-out left-hander and the right-hander, and the speed with which he just went past. It's like we saw in Jeddah last week. It was amazing to see. What I thought was actually even more interesting was watching Sergio Perez. Obviously, he was coming through the field from the back. We would have expected him to come through. It was when he overtook Oscar Piastri for about 8th place, and Piastri himself had DRS, and the speed differential was amazing. It was as if Piastri's DRS was shut. It's amazing what Red Bull have done with the RB19 and the DRS, and it just looks like the complete package at the moment.
It does look like the complete package there, Michael. I want to stay on you. You mentioned Piastri. McLaren seemed to, quote-unquote, improved over the weekend.
Well, they got their first points on the board. Lando Norris finishing 6th and Oscar Piastri in 8th. I think that flattered them a little bit, really, because there was a bit of attrition. Obviously, we saw Leclerc retiring. We saw George Russell retiring. Carlos Sainz got that penalty, which dropped him out of the reckoning. The two Alpines collided with each other. I don't think you can really say that McLaren are the 6th and 8th fastest cars in a grid of 20 in Formula One at the moment. But they've been quite bullish about updates. We heard Andrea Stella this weekend talking about McLaren having 3 main upgrades planned over the course of this year. The first one to come in Baku. Obviously, we've now got a 3-week break, so the teams are going to be flat out back at the factories trying to get their inventory of parts and trying to get all their upgrades ready for Baku. So, obviously a very, very good, a much better weekend for McLaren. It couldn't really have gone much worse than it had in the first couple of races, but I think there's still plenty to do for them at Woking.
The only way is up at the MTC Dieter. We do have some new teams joining the Formula One circus.
Well, we don't know yet whether they're joining, but we certainly know that they're very, very hopeful of joining. We've had, I believe, 4 expressions of interest, as they call it. In other words, 4 entities have indicated to the FIA that they would like to join Formula One, either in 25 or 26, depending on how quickly they can get themselves ready. We have discussed in the past the Andretti application with Cadillac. We have alluded to Panthera. Last week, we revealed the Formula Equal program with Craig Pollock. Rather humorous that we revealed it, and it was sort of swept under the carpet by all the other outlets. assets until Craig went and spoke to CNN about it, incidentally, because somebody from CNN had seen the story on Racing News 365. And suddenly there was this big flurry as though everybody knew about it, which I found rather humorous because Craig had really kept that thing well under wraps until we revealed it. And then, of course, late last week, we revealed the high-tech project, which in my book is potentially the most advanced of the four. They've been working on it for 2 years now. They've got a very, very strong team of aerodynamicists, vehicle designers, all sorts of people involved. And it will be fascinating to see what comes out eventually when the FIA takes a decision. I believe that there'll be 2 grid spots available to new teams. There are 4 applicants, so let's see which of the 4 actually make it.
As Michael said earlier, no races for the next few weeks as the Chinese Grand Prix was cancelled. So we're back in Baku with the next race on the 30th of April. We'll be back next week with all the latest updates from the world of Formula One. We'll see you then.